This is Saj Razvi, and this is part 3 of our series on the CAR Containment and Autonomic Regulation Trauma Model. Today we're going to be diving more deeply into the world of resourcing. So let's begin with a definition. A resource is an activity, a memory, or even a fantasy that causes a person's nervous system to shift to a more calm, relaxed state. Okay, that's the sort of the simplest version of it. And the reason behind it, the importance of resourcing, is because it is essential to the processing of trauma. I think it's also essential to living a good life and enjoying yourself, but it's in terms of psychotherapy, it's essential to processing trauma. And what I mean by that is that most of your clients, if you work in private practice, but especially if you are in an agency setting, most of your clients are going to show up with stress, anxiety, dissociative symptoms. They're going to have little access to resource states. Right? So creating a resting place in a person's nervous system where their body gets to feel calm, connected, loved, held, safe, this will allow them to work much more effectively with trauma when the time comes to do that. So basically think about it. Think about sort of, the ways that people need to be functional, that they need to show up for work, they need to show up for their families, and if they're going to open some of these doors to working with trauma, with their history, they have to know that they can leave it and be functional if their system is going to allow them to dive into it. So that's a little bit about what it is and the importance of it. And let's go ahead and jump into the steps involved in it. The first thing I want to say about it is that most therapists intuitively resource their clients, and whether it's through the relationship or through the rapport that gets built in psychotherapy or other means, we kind of naturally do it. But we laid the steps out, this protocol out, because we felt that it gets at the essential qualities that cause a person's system to shift to state zero, to calm and restful. So the first step in resourcing is accessing, right? And this is cognitive. This is talk therapy. This particular step. And what accessing does is it's you sitting down with the client and coming up with a list of resources, right? I would say I ask my clients to come up with 10 internal resources, and by that I mean 10 imaginative or memory states that they have, and they could be from recently in their lives or all the way back to childhood. And it could be something like that trip to the beach where nobody was anxious and everybody had a good time, that kind of thing. And maybe it only happened once, but it happened, so that's a resource. And then I also have clients write down 10 external resources, meaning activities that they can engage in the present moment that cause their system to shift. Like for a lot of people, walking or reading a book or watching a movie or working out. Right? These are things that really sort of relax people. Right? And so once we have that list, I'll have them put it up on the refrigerator or put it in their wallet or their smartphone. And the idea being that when their mood shifts, when the stress shows up again, which undoubtedly it will, they may have a very difficult time remembering what their resources are. So if all they have to do is remember, go to the fridge or check my phone and engage one of those activities, then it's much easier to do. Right? So that's accessing. The next phase is experiential in nature. This is where the rubber meets the road. Right? This is where we really see if the resources they came up with in the first step are actually resources. So the second step is deepening, right? And they're deepening. You pick one of their resources and you deepen into it. So let's pick a memory state, right? Let's again go to that time at the beach when everybody was having a good time. So the idea here is that the nervous system responds to concrete, visceral data, right? In other words, the more simple it is, the more you involve the five senses, like seeing, hearing, smelling, taste, touch, the more the effect is going to be achieved, right? If it's complex, if it's abstract, if it's cognitive, then it's sort of not going to be as efficient. So for example, right, if we're talking to a client that is talking about their beach experience, so I'll ask them, what did they see, and they'll describe, seeing sort of their family member or members smile and running around. They'll describe seeing the sun and the sailboats and the ocean and that kind of thing. And then I'll ask, well, what did you hear? And maybe they'll describe the surf or the sound of people laughing or seagulls or the wind, and so on, right? So what temperature was it? Was it nighttime or daytime? What could you smell the ocean? Things like that. And the idea is that your client will have this resource internalized, so they'll typically lead the way. They won't need that much coaching on this one. One trick that can be useful here is to ask your client to describe this resource to you as if they're describing it to a small child, right? And the idea here is that that will cue their brain to keep it simple. It'll cue their brain to keep it in very simple language, sort of the way that we experience resource. It's not complex. Okay, so once you have that resource, you can tell if it's working, because you'll want to move from the resource image to check in with the body, right? And that's the key here, that the body relaxes. And what you'll find with a lot of people is that you'll spend a few minutes resourcing in the image, and then you'll check in with the body, and some parts will be calmer, like their belly will be calmer, their throat will be relaxed, their shoulders might unwind, and maybe other parts will still be active. So if that's the case, great. Then leave the body and move back to the resource image. The idea here being that stress has its own momentum, right? And to counteract that, resource needs to be given time. If it doesn't work in just a few minutes, that's fine. Stay with it longer until it starts building up its own momentum, and it will take over, right? So I want to mention a different class of people in terms of how they respond to resourcing. Some folks have, there's so much activation in their body, right? There's so much stress and trauma that they're dealing with that they've learned to experientially avoid their own body. In this case, what you might find is if you spend time with the resource image and then go to the body, it's going to be still really a difficult place for them to be. So the rule here, the key here, is to spend a lot more time with the resource image, and maybe just quickly touch in with the body, see if it's changing, and then move back to the resource image, right? And if you want, you can just isolate and find one specific part of the body that feels resourced, or even just neutral, and kind of highlight that, hang out there, and then go back to the resource image. But the point of deepening, again, is you're shifting them to a calm state, and their body is the touchstone of this. And certainly some people can resource without having the body, but we want to ultimately include the body as part of the resource, meaning that it's a major resource, that it's a major ally that your client can have, that if there's a lot of stress and trauma, they're not relating to themselves or their body as an ally. Okay, so step 2 is deepening. The third step is anchoring. So great that you deepened into this, and in the therapy office, and that your client is able to have this experience. But we want them to have this experience more often, right? Especially outside of therapy. So there's a phrase in neuroscience that goes, the neurons that fire together wire together. right? So, meaning your client has deeply internalized what stress feels like, right? An image that I use is that if there's a a grassy field and stress is sort of a pathway that your client has walked many times over this field, so there's a nice beaten dirt path through this field, and it goes to a rough neighborhood. And what we want to do with anchoring is create another pathway that goes to a nice, calm, relaxed neighborhood, which means that they're going to have to walk it multiple times to deepen that groove, to make it an option for them. So they do this by repetition, right? So anchoring is you're basically having them establish physical anchors or some kind of reminder that takes them back to their resource when they forget, right? So an anchor could be a sticky note that they put on their bathroom mirror that reminds them of the beach, right? An anchor could be a bracelet or an image on their cell phone that they have to see all the time. We just want them to basically bump into images or reminders of their resource that remind them that yes, this is here, even though you might be stressed right now. Okay, so that's anchoring, right? The fourth step is widening, right? So widening is saying basically, great that it's great that you have the beach. Right? Now, let's find other places or other resources that work for you. And a nice thing about how widening works is that it's a state dependent memory, right? Which is to say that, I'll describe it this way. When people are depressed, they can really often remember other times. They can easily remember other times when they were depressed. So the same works in the positive. When people are having a good time with their resource, they can much more easily remember other good times, right? So one nice thing to do is when somebody is actually deepened into a resource, take advantage of that and have them sort of list other resources that they may have missed earlier on when they were accessing, right? So that's widening, right? And then the final step, the final phase of resourcing is testing, right? So in other words, we want to know if when a client gets stressed or they move into a dissociative state, that they can bring themselves back from it. Right? So it's great that they can come back in therapy with your guidance and support, but if they're not in therapy, if they're just out living their life, they will need to know that it's good to know for the client as well as for the therapy process, for you guys to know that the client has the ability to bring themselves back to a calm, resting place, even if they're stressed. So what happens in the testing phase is you will introduce a stress into the client's life, and for some clients you won't have to do anything; they're already stressed. So introducing a stress into the client's world, right? They're just remembering a small stress or maybe even a larger stress, and then you kind of sit back as a therapist and say, okay, take yourself back to resource. And the idea here is if they can do that, if they can sort of manage to work with the momentum of the stress that you just created in their system and shift their system back to a resource state, great, that's exactly what we're looking for, right? And when they can do that, it builds their confidence. It builds their sense that they're not at the mercy of the chaos of their own internal nervous system. That they actually can steer the car here a little bit. So that's if people learn to do that and you feel that they can do that effectively in their life and they don't have to sort of revert back to more destructive, maladaptive resourcing or coping mechanisms like addiction, then great, that's it. You can move on from resourcing, right? So those are the phases of it. So I want to say a few more things about resourcing, especially for the chronically stressed, chronically traumatized client, right? These are people that will have a difficult time resourcing. These are people who their stresses, their traumas are typically have occurred early in life, and they've typically occurred in their family of origin. Right? These are people, when you ask them about what was life like before the trauma, they'll say there was nothing. There was no life before the trauma. That's all. That's how they remember things, right? And if you ask them, wow, do you have can you access a resource memory from your family, right? From growing up, and they'll work at it. They'll look at it, and they'll say no. Right? They'll say that no, that nothing was resourcing there. It was all really just difficult stuff. And the view that we ask our students to hold when they get this type of response is to, sort of gently hold that is the client's experience, but also be a little stubborn with this, right? Basically, the idea here is that if there wasn't a resource, if there wasn't some good things in this person's life as they were growing up, they wouldn't be sitting in front of you. They wouldn't be alive, right? So it's just sort of a view to hold when somebody really can't find resources in their life. And if it's too difficult for them, or they're becoming too distressed at finding it, then it's fine to move to a fantasy image, right? So something to know about the autonomic nervous system is that it doesn't respond just to what's true. It doesn't care about what's true. It just cares about present moment data, right? So, for example, if you were to go to the movies and you saw a nice, fuzzy, warm Pixar movie, your nervous system would respond accordingly. You would calm down. You'd go to a very nice, good place inside of yourself. If, on the other hand, you went to a horror movie, right, your nervous system would respond accordingly. Right? You'd become activated. Even though none of those things happen to you, whether in the Pixar movie or in the horror movie, your nervous system still responds. Right? So again, it's not concerned about truth. It's just the concern here is whether we can get it to shift to a calmer, more relaxed place. Okay, so have a good day and take care. Bye-bye.